a person free a slave? Well, if you have a slave, that slave can't actually sign contracts. The slave might be your business manager, but all the slave could do is the paperwork. But if you need a slave representing your business and you live in Rome and you need somebody in Ostia, the port city of Rome, to be able to be there and watch your imports and your exports of your business, you need someone who can sign contracts, who can lend money, who can borrow money, who can do things like that. Slaves can't do that legally, but freedmen can. So rich Romans were often freeing slaves for their own purposes. It was not like they were giving them a great deal. This was part of their constructing their own business expansion. Sons and daughters, though, were still part of the household as long as the paterfamilias was alive. So sons legally were still under their paterfamilias. Now, this is all legally and officially what's the case. You wouldn't really see this working all like this. For example, I said wives were not really part of their husband's household. Legally, that's correct. But you see cases in letters and all kinds of stuff from the ancient world that women actually were more unofficially part of their husband's household. They ran it when he was away, for example. They told his slave, she might have her own slaves and her own property. The wife had her own property that was separate from the husband's property. But in practical purposes, most of the time, they just mixed these together and they might use different things. So the legal situation was set up to try to keep the wife's ownership as part of a different family, and so her money didn't go to her husband, and his money didn't go to her. But this was a legal situation to try to keep this balance of power among households. Practically, sons didn't all live in the same place with their father. They would get married and move off to an apartment or someplace down the street or to another city. But this is the legal situation. Now, when you go to jail, when you go to court, slaves, of course, can't represent themselves in court at all. They don't have any legal standing. But if you're a freedman, the other thing I should tell you is that in Roman law, if you're manumitted as a slave, you're made free. If you're manumitted in the normal way they did it, that makes you a Roman citizen if your owner was a Roman citizen. Notice what this means. Only in the Roman Empire could slavery actually start being a way that you could move up in society. Because if you were a talented slave, your owner might free you, probably would free you. When he freed you, if he was a Roman citizen, you would automatically become a Roman citizen also. And your children would be Roman citizens. And although you were a freedman, which was lower in status than a free person, there were some privileges you couldn't have, your children would be, if they were born after you had been freed, would be free people, not freed. So within a couple of generations, people could move up from being the lowest slaves to 2 generations being free Roman citizens. So Roman slavery and the freedom of that was actually one way that a few people in the ancient world recognized some kind of social mobility, which was very rare in the Roman Empire. Any questions about any of that? Now, why is this important for the rest of the stuff? This will be very important because Christians started out as house churches, and their house churches fit sometimes the model of a Greek ecclesia, an assembly, but sometimes the model of the Roman household. And so this household structure becomes very important for the growth and structure and even the theology of Christianity eventually. This is also important, though, for Roman politics. Because if you're a freedman, or even if you're a free person, sometimes see free men would connect themselves to a powerful Roman who's higher status than them because they could use him for important things. For example, say you want to take your neighbor to court because your neighbor is starting impinging on your land. Well, if you're of lower status, lower social status, the judge is going to look at you and say, come on. You're poor, your neighbor's rich, I'm going to side for the neighbor. Because Roman legal structures, and they even said this in Roman laws, if you're a judge and you have a rich man and a poor man in your court, of course you're going to decide for the rich man. Because the poor man has incentive to cheat. He's poor. But the rich man already has money. He doesn't have any incentive to cheat. That's their logic. But so Roman legal system was really geared toward the wealthy and the people of high status. For that reason, if you wanted to win a court case, it helped, or have somebody represent you in politics, all kinds, it helped to have strong patrons. So you'd have a patron who would be higher class, richer, more powerful, have some political power. And you would be loyal to your patron, and your patron would then represent you in court, try to get you jobs, try to get you more business, do all the kinds of things that patrons do for their clients. Also, if your patron wanted to run for a city office, your patron would expect you to be loyal and vote for him. So lower class people, now what happens though when you have, your clients, your freedmen, your sons, your daughters, all these are part of this pyramid structure, and they all benefit from a strong paterfamilias, and he benefits by having a strong household and a large household. But most of the free citizens of the Roman Empire, of Rome, were poor people, free and even citizens, but they were poor people who weren't part of any rich household. So what do you have with all these other people, these other Romans around here, who don't have a powerful patron, who don't have a powerful paterfamilias to help them out? This is where Julius Caesar was quite the genius. Julius Caesar came from a patrician family, that is, a family of an aristocratic family, but he started siding with a party in Rome called the Populares. I think this is on your handout, correct? The Roman Senate in the late part of the Republic, started dividing itself into two sort of parties, not official parties, but factions. The optimates, meaning the best, tended to support the interests of the wealthy senators and the few wealthiest families. The populares started representing the interests of everybody else in Rome. That populares just comes from the word for the people. Julius Caesar was from one of these aristocratic patrician families, although his family didn't have a lot of money. They weren't really, really wealthy. But he had great birth, and so he started getting more power politically and financially by setting himself up as the patron of the patronless. The generals ran their armies this way. So Julius Caesar, if you were really going to be important in Rome, you had to serve as a general at some point. Julius Caesar capitalized on his role as a general of a large army that was at the time winning battles in Gaul, the modern France. One example about this is of how Julius Caesar was the patron, the paterfamilias in a sense, of his army, his soldiers, is that one time the Senate, who got nervous about Julius's growth in popularity and power, they wanted to take some legions, some Roman legions, away from Julius Caesar in Gaul and send them to another general in Syria. The reason they did this is because they wanted to take some of Julius's power away. They were afraid he was going to set himself up as a dictator, which of course he did. So they took these Roman legions away and they sent them to Syria. When they left, Julius Caesar, out of his own pocket, gave every soldier in those legions a year's pay. This is what patrons do, you see. He bought the loyalty of his soldiers when they were being taken out of his control. This is the patron-client structure at work in the Roman army. Julius also then set himself up in the city when he started gaining more power in Rome. Actually, he gained power in Rome mainly by military might, by kind of making the Senate nervous and winning a few battles. And that was against the law. It was against the law for Julius Caesar to do that, but he did it anyway. He tried to consolidate his power, though, by putting forth policies that moderately helped the lower classes. He didn't cancel taxes, cancel debts, but he mitigated debts. He eased some of the strains on the poor. He was assassinated by conservative Senate forces, Brutus and Cassius and others, on the Ides of March, as you all know, March 15th, 44 BCE. He had adopted another Roman, Octavian, and Julius Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, then formed an alliance with Mark Antony, who had been Julius Caesar's friend, and a lesser-known figure named Lepidus, whom you don't really need to remember, because in the end it turned out that Mark Antony and Octavian fought a civil war. Octavian won, and Octavian defeated Mark Antony, and by this time Mark Antony had palled up with Cleopatra, queen of Egypt, and Octavian beat both of them, and he became the sole ruler of the empire in 27 BCE. He refused the title of king, and he took the traditional republican titles. One of his propagandists said this about him: "The pristine form of the republic was recalled as of old." Or Augustus, he had taken the title Augustus by this time, which means the Great. He himself said, "I transferred the republic from my power to the dominion of the Senate and the people of Rome." In other words, in his propaganda, Augustus basically said, "I'm not a king, I'm just another senator, and I'm giving the Senate and the people all their power back." A lie. All lies. See, lying in government didn't start with our government. So Augustus actually reconstituted the Senate, and it was just that, a Senate reconstituted by the emperor. He became more and more the patron of all the people. And this is the way the emperor would forever then try to present himself. He and his family, the emperor's family, was in a sense the patron for the whole people of the Roman Empire, at least for all the Romans. The paterfamilias of the entire empire. This has led to what we famously call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, because you had the end of long hundreds of years of civil wars and other wars, at least within Rome itself. There were always battles and wars going on the boundaries, the frontiers of the Roman Empire, but within the central part of the empire, there was an amazing period of peace. Most people saw this peace, many people in history say it is good. It's debatable whether it was good for everybody. Non-Romans and poor people may have seen the Pax Romana as more oppressive than a liberation, just like people saw the Pax Americana that way after the collapse of the Soviet Union and before the beginning of the Iraq War. The Romans maintained peace, for one thing, by leaving local populations pretty much alone when it came to local customs, religions, and living arrangements. When they thought it was necessary, they maintained peace by destroying communities and forcibly moving populations. But they tried to do that only when they needed to do so to keep their absolute control. The Romans prospered by taxation. They did hold censuses, not universal ones, as mentioned in the Bible, but local censuses, in order to keep taxes high and fully paid. But the Romans themselves didn't want to be bothered with collecting taxes. So they would have local, sort of higher class local elites would bid for the right to collect local taxes. And so the Romans would take the highest bid. In other words, if I'm a rich, wealthy person in Corinth, I'll say, I'll be the local tax collector, and I'll guarantee you I'll send to Rome this amount of money per year. Of course, the Romans didn't care then how much I charged you, the people of Corinth and its area. Actually, the city of Corinth wouldn't have been taxed because it was a Roman colony, and one of the benefits of being a Roman colony is that you didn't have to pay taxes, or at least the citizens didn't have to pay taxes. But the people in the outlying villages and towns and farms and everything would pay taxes. And if I'm the tax collector, the way I make a profit is by charging you a lot more than I need just to send to Rome. Romans didn't care about this. They just knew it was going to happen. This is the way they collected their taxes. This is why the word tax collector is such a bad word for everybody but the Romans. Why you'll see in the Gospels the term tax collectors and sinners. Why? Because the Jews didn't like the tax collectors because they were being ripped off by them.